Good morning. Very good morning to all of you. Welcome. So, as you can see, I'm here in the middle of a jungle. This is the jungle that the municipality of Cervia wanted to put on the stage in order to remind us of the importance of green spaces. We're in Cervia. Once again, Cervia shows to be the capital city of green areas. And we're here to talk about some very important aspects, some aspects that are part of our lives, they were part of our lives before, and they will be even more part of our lives in the next future. We're going to talk about environmental emergency, climate emergency, and well, the health emergency now obviously is the main emergency, but we know that we also have to cope with the environmental emergency. We would have loved to be here all together, face to face, but we have to be here at a distance. But we deeply wanted to have this conference today. The municipality of Cervia wanted to organize this conference anyway. We will talk about some topics that are part of our daily job for some of us, but well, you know, for some other people, it will be something interesting, something new to hear about. We will talk about green areas, we will talk about the importance of trees and the importance of urban forests for our lives in the future. Because, you know, well, urbanization, that is to say, the migration from the country to the cities has now turned into reality. So this is what we have to talk about urban forests. During the day, we will have very high-level speakers, and they will tell us about what has happened to our climate and also what we have to do in order to try and mitigate climate change, what we have to do in order to promote the environment in a very, well, with a high degree of awareness. And you know that Cervia has always played a very important role from this point of view. So now it's time to invite Elisa Pellegrini. She is professor at the University of Pisa, master degree in design and management of urban green spaces and landscaping. And she's a friend of Cervia. I know that she created many gardens for Maggio in Fiore, blossoming May. So please, Professor Pellegrini, try and respect the timetable. I will be very strict with you, just like with the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to also say hello to everyone on behalf of the president of the degree course, who has always had a very active role also in the relationship with the municipality of Cervia. Part of the speakers, of the previous speakers, have already mentioned something about what I'm going to talk about. And I would like to go back to the concept of environmental education. It dates back to the end of the 90s, and it refers to the fact of the purpose of teaching the structure and the organization of the natural environment to men and women, providing them with the right behaviors in order to make them sustainable towards the ecosystems without altering the balances. This scheme shows you the 5 main steps that characterize the evolution of the concept of environmental education. And considering a series of important events such as environmental crisis or the spreading of the eco-friendly ideology, well, this has become something more and more global and related to the community. In 2015, the EPA gave a definition of environmental education. They said that it is a process allowing individuals to focus on environmental problems with a solving perspective and be able to make decisions based on an in-depth knowledge of these things. As you can see in this graph, the role of citizenship and participation is fundamental. And you see that there is a continuous cycle in which the participation of citizens is core to the four principles of environmental education: understanding, responsibility, awareness, and competence. So going from theories to practices, the environmental education, the name itself, makes us understand that there are two components: education and environment. Education gives us the communication media, let's say, to translate a scientific message in a language that several social groups can understand. Um, on the other side, there is the environment, which is a component that, let's say, sets the balance uh, that exists between man and the environment. So there is a linear relationship between the need to know, reflect, and act in order to define strategies and programs and projects that are useful to teach what I saying at the beginning, some good behaviors. I would like to give you a few examples of environmental education of our research group. We have been working for over 30 years in the field of environmental education, and the purpose is to raise awareness among several, let's say, age groups towards air pollution and the problems with the ozone layer. Um, there are biomonitoring techniques at the basis with specific plants and spaces that are used as spies, so to say. So they tell us the symptoms that the ozone is somehow provoking and causing. This is something that allows us to focus on a problem that cannot perceived by our senses because it cannot be touched, it cannot be smelled, and it cannot be seen. So, on the picture on the right, as Professor Morelli said earlier, we worked with primary school children from, well, actually preschool children from 3 to 5 years old, which are fundamental when we talk about awareness. And specially trained staff went to in classroom and followed the different steps with the children. And they created this sort of tobacco mini gardens, and the children took them at home or kept them at school. And they realized after 1 week the kind of macroscopic reactions, the ozone. So children could see by using a magnifying glass what happened on the plants, and they could even quantify it by what they call battle. And this raised awareness not only among the children, but also among their parents, because we distributed questionnaires concerning the problem of climate. So here is the connection with citizen science that was introduced at the end of the 90s for the first time. And it is defined as a competence, as a knowledge existing within some groups of people that were traditionally considered as ignorant, in inverted commas. This means that two seemingly distant worlds can collaborate, can exchange opinions, and deal with environmental problems. This first definition and approach was innovative at the time, but it was not so much, let's say, appreciated, because there was this difference between science and knowledge. Some years later, 2010, there was another definition of citizen science. It said that it is a research technique allowing for the use of public, let's say, representatives of the general public to collect scientific data. So here there was a sort of mutual relationship between these two words. So that was a turning point because you can see here how the scientific world attached much more attention to this topic. You see here the growing trends in our scientific papers published at the international level. Here are some case studies that states very clearly how the researchers, thanks to university students, volunteers, teachers, could define some protocols to monitor and map a particular species and what did they do? They identified different anthropic actions on these species, these Alianthus altissima species, and they monitored infestation sites and focused on the problems that could be connected to the presence of these species. In the city of Trieste, a research group also launched a similar initiative, and here researchers involved young students between the age of 11 and 21. And after some training and some quite basic IT tools, they mapped the presence of invasive species such as Ailanthus, Ambrosia, and Senecio. And they uploaded several observations, and these observations were validated by the group of experts. So they confirmed the data collected. In the United Kingdom, a project was launched about 5 years ago, not for the mapping of invasive species, but to identify the presence of Fraxinus Excelsior, and here the involvement of citizens was fundamental. Over 400 trees were selected from areas where there was a high infection of this pathogen. And so they observed the effect in terms of, let's say, progressive deterioration. Well, for sure, this was a very good situation because there were, you see here that there are some practical case studies showing how good the citizen science can be, but there can be problems. Problems connected to the fact that some researchers think that it's not useful to convey, to communicate, let's say, their knowledge to the citizens. And on the other side, citizens can take some extreme stances, extreme position. So what might be the challenge for the future? The challenge for the future is going on collaborating. As you can see here in this cyclic procedure, which is similar to the symbol of the infinite. Well, for sure, researchers will be both the citizens taking advantage of research and collaborating in research, but on the other side, there will be those who have the knowledge to validate the results achieved. In order to conduct a particular research based on participation of the community and a smart science system. And this was all for me. Thank you, Lisa, for your speech, for your contribution. We are rushing because we are slightly late, but I think that can be acceptable. And let's move back to the local area and let's talk about pine woods, in particular the pine woods of Cervia and Ravenna. And let's start with Commander Giovanni Nobili, head of the Biodiversity Department of the Carabinieri Corps in Punta Marina. Welcome. Welcome and thank you for being with us. Everyone is welcoming you. They all know you. And I give the floor immediately so we can make up for some lost time. Thank you. Thank you. What can I add after all these very interesting presentations? Well, we are working on coastal pine woods and we have been doing it for quite a long time now, all together with lots of authorities and with the great attention that the people from Romagna have always had for this type of environment, because they love it from the bottom of their hearts. They are really fond of their pine woods. Being the head of the biodiversity department of the Carabinieri Corps, we manage the pine woods in Cervia, Ravenna, and up to the area of Ferrara. And at the basis of this attention, there are important reasons. There are some great difficulties that come not only from this area, but also from far away. These are global problems that we all know very well. And we know the effects of climate change, of the sea level rise, and we know the effects on a flat land with low coastal areas, as it is in Emilia-Romagna, where we have problems, and the effects are quite visible. And over the last few years, the environment conditions of these ecosystems have also changed. So coastal ecosystems in Ravenna, but also ecosystems that are connected to the social and economic fabric in Romagna. Because for Ravenna, the pinewood is a historical element that must be present. Being in the Carabinieri Corps for biodiversity, well, we focus on coastal pine woods. In 1905, these pine woods were first protected also by the law, and these areas were well, started to be planted, and now their role is crucial. If you think of Romagna and of Ravenna, but also for tourists coming from abroad and from everywhere, the fact of running or cycling or walking in the pine wood is something that other areas cannot offer. So it's a distinguishing mark. If you think of the other side of Italy on the Tyrrhenian Sea, well, in Romagna, we need to look at the future and to what can be defined as the governance of this territory. And for sure, there's a limitation connected to the, let's say, look at the future that we can have, because we should not just think in terms of 10, 20, or 10 years, but look at um, the situation in 80 years or so. If you think of the rise in the sea level, this might be from 50 to 80 centimeters. And you see here the pictures of what is happening in this area. And this, let's say, drop in the soil level is connected to the sea level rise. And there's a process connected to the social and economical management of the area. Things are changing. When these pine woods were initially created and designed, the context was completely different. They had to be protected from a historical point of view, because at the beginning of the 1900 of the 20th century, the situation was very, very different, and land reclamation was underway. So the creation of coastal pine woods that are now characterizing for the area of Cervia was deeply connected to the natural inclination of man to go on and follow the territory. The law at that time talked about the fact of planting trees in the maritime areas, because there were areas near the sea that had been completely abandoned, and maybe the activities of man could enrich those areas. At that time, that was what happened. This created labor, created work for a lot of people. And there were lots of people from Romagna that played a key role in the reclamation, also in Agro-Romano and Agropontino, so in the area around Rome. And they created those very known coastal areas that are widely known by tourists as well. So if there is a request coming from tourists, this means that what has been defined so far works. And this is something that now it's completely different from what from the past. And the concept of ecosystem services is fundamental. In the past, there were only systems connected to the material side. For example, if you think of a pine wood, maybe the sale of pine nuts was the only system, the only service that was considered. Whereas now there are, for example, regulation ecosystem services. They gave the chance even in the past to get protected from marine events, for example, from adverse weather conditions, or to protect crops and the fields. But it wasn't possible to talk about real ecosystem services just because 100 years ago, this kind of things were not necessary and were not required by the society, at least in this area and at that time. Things are changing. They are changing very rapidly. And unfortunately, this leaves us quite doubtful for the future. The fact of having such conferences and chances to meet and to talk about also the major, the greatest negative effects that have become more and more visible, such as exaggerated weather events connected to the climate change, should make us reflect. And altogether, we should consider that this new situation will affect us all and also affects the stakeholders, all these stakeholders. So both citizens uh, and all the businesses and activities in the local area, because they benefit from the natural resources for their businesses as well. So this request that in the course of years made us move from a protection of the environment connected to the requests of material goods, of material assets, to an approach which is much more, let's say, immaterial and connected more to cultural aspects. So what a citizen expects, what the community consider the value of these assets and of this heritage. Uh, so the beauty of natural environment. Well, this mm, if you think of this natural environment, its origin is actually artificial, it is man-made, but it is now a natural aspect connected to the activities of man, to human activities. This gives an indication and a guideline about how to manage these areas in the future. The governance require the governance of these territories requires to consider them in 20, 30, 50, up to 80 years. And these areas will not be the same, but they have a strength which will be able to promote this area again, together with the cultural aspects. So cultural ecosystem services as drivers for this process. In the past, the expectations were only connected to the agricultural world, to farming, whereas now there's a closer connection with tourism. And what will happen in the future? Well, we don't know. But the main goal, the main final goal should be giving biodiversity the chance to be stronger, and for wetlands, pine woods, and the local areas as a whole. Well, let them be at the basis of the ecosystem stability that was guaranteed by the activities of those who came before us. Thank you very much, Commander. Thank you for this particular point of view of coastal pine woods. I think we can move to the last presentations of today. Massimiliano Costa, Director of Projects for Environmental Promotion and Protection of Ravenna City Council. And he's going to give us another point of view of pine woods, both in terms of culture and nature.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your very kind invitation. So I will also try to share my screen. I hope it works. So the pine wood of Ravenna, well, these are ancient woods, and they date back to ancient times. The trees are not autochthonous trees of our coastal area, and well, so, but then they became something familiar to all of us. Can you see my screen? All right, so I will have to start again. All right, yes. Okay, sorry, then I will have to start again from scratch. So I was talking about Ravenna pine woods. These are artificial woods, and they were firstly created in ancient times with these trees with Iberian origin, or maybe from Corse, or maybe from Sardinia. So sorry, I would like to move to the next slide. All right, so this map shows you the origin. The purple color is where the pine trees were introduced around 2,000 years ago. And so you can see the green is the origin of the trees, but anyhow, these are areas cultivated by human beings. Well, well, since the ancient times. The pine tree prefers sandy soil, dry soil, and in North Adriatic areas, very often the soil is quite wet. So there are some factors contrasting with the growth of this species. But anyhow, human beings have tried to fight against these difficulties for pine trees, especially in some areas, not in the lowlands, though. As you can see on the image, the lowlands are not a good area for pine woods, for pine trees, especially, well, in particular, Ravenna pine woods were first planted 2,000 years ago, at least the small pine tree plantations. So they date back to the Roman Empire. But, well, actually, there are some pine woods dating back to the 5th and the 5th century before Christ. And then, well, they grew more and more, and they reached their largest extension, around 7,000 hectares, around well, around the 16th century and the 18th century. Pine woods were divided into four larger sectors. They were run along the centuries, first by the monks, Benedictine monks, then they were run by the state, and then by France after Napoleonic invasion, and then they became property of the municipalities in well, 1873, when their surface was quite reduced. It was only 4,700 hectares. This is a pine wood. Well, 1940, a photo from Zangari archive, and then this is a San Vitale pine wood. So as you can see, they were quite different from the current condition nowadays. These are photos from the top. This is the San Vitale pine wood, the largest one in the north of the city of Ravenna. And this is the pine wood of Classe, around 900 hectares in the south of Ravenna city. They are now quite far from the sea, around well, 3 to 5 kilometers from the sea. And actually, they were planted for very specific reasons. First of all, for eating pine nuts, the use of pine cones, and also the use of resin to produce pitch and black smoke for ink. So the harvest of pine cones has always been quite important in the history of Ravenna. And Ravenna had a very long experience and deep experience in this field. Unfortunately, this is being abandoned at the moment. And well, pine nuts were processed, harvested, and then processed. And so this is all documented by the historians. And so pine woods were important for the production of timber, but also as grassland. The citizens from Ravenna used to breed horses and cows. Horses and cows were considered to be compatible with the presence of with the wood. And then, well, the citizens of Ravenna could also use the pine wood for hunting and for fishing, as well as using them for grassland, as grassland. At the moment, pine woods are still used for hunting, but they are now important for leisure, well, from picnics to a day out. And also people do exercise in the pine wood today. And they're also quite famous among tourists. So pine woods have changed quite a lot over the centuries. The first documents are from the 18th century. Count Francesco Ginanni told us about them in 1774, but also some Latin authors like Martiali, for example. He told us about the presence of animals and trees in the forest around Ravenna. And then we have the text by Pietro Zangari, Flora e vegetazione delle pinete ravennati from 1936. Well, now, just to demonstrate how much pine woods have changed over the time, and this is quite incredible, I know. These are the animals that used to be present in the 18th century, the deer, wild cat, pelicans, even pelicans, and, well, wolf. Wolves maybe are coming back into the pine woods. Some of these species are still present, though, like this ones, and some are new. Some are new species in the pine wood. For example, well, squirrels are new to the pine wood, and they are starting to arrive. So the pine woods are changing quite a lot, not just from the animal point of view, but also from the structural point of view, forest point of view. This is due to the different management by human beings. So human beings have decided to manage them in a different way nowadays. So pine woods were planted from the Romans up to the 16th century in a totally different way. In the past, they were located near the sea, and they were actually by the sea. They were planted on a sandy soil, and well, then those lands were invaded by the water carried by Lamone River, and so the conditions of those lands changed totally. And besides, human beings used the woods in a totally different way. Very intensive use in the 18th century, and then human beings started concentrating more on agriculture, sorry, up to Zangari. So in the beginning of the 20th century, this is what the pine wood looked like in the 70s, 1970s. Professor Pirolo says that the pine wood was changing. So the wood was changing, as well as the normal four different layers. So starting from, from the bottom, we had grass, then shrubs, and then smaller trees and taller trees. There's a fifth layer, that is to say, the pine trees that at that time, so in mid 20th century, the pine trees almost totally covered the forest. And so they looked a bit like tropical forests at that time. But since then, things have changed even more because, well, due to different management of the pine woods, but also due to, well, changing conditions, environmental conditions, climate conditions. We have talked about them so much today. Well, as I said, the woods have changed up to nowadays. And well, in fact, nowadays, we have those trees that have adapted the most to the new conditions. So we have near the dunes, we still have stone pine because the soil is dry and suitable to the dunes, consolidated dunes. And then we also have Mediterranean shrubs instead in those areas where, due to subsidence and also due to wet conditions, the wood has changed. Well, we have poplar, obviously, white poplar, and Mesophilus wood. Then in those areas where human beings have tried to plant pine trees until 30 years ago, We are now actually seeing that pine trees are not surviving anymore. These are flooded areas, and we have hygrophilous species. So we have black alder, for example. We have southern ash, and we also have, well, many other, well, trees, for example, white willow. So here on these images, we can see the forest at the moment, the wood at the moment. You can see the wood that is close to the lagoon. And here, this is mainly dominated by pine trees. You can see the color of the foliage and the size. Instead, here with the darker um, darker color, we have well, holm oak mainly. Here instead we have white poplar. What are we doing today in order to manage pine woods? Well, just to conclude, every year the municipality of Ravenna invests quite a lot of money for the management of pine woods, around 1 million euros. It's, well, municipal money, partially also private money, and also one part of it belongs to the plan for rural development. In some other cases, they are extraordinary projects, for example, life projects. And well, we maintain the roads along the pine woods. We also maintain floodgates. We maintain the dams, the little houses inside the pine woods. And we also maintain the trails, information boards, and also some forest interventions. For example, well, as you know, fortunately, luckily, the wood grows, and so we have to do some selective chopping down of trees. We also have, obviously, to well, we also have to remove dangerous trees along the roads and the trails if they are located in critical positions. So our main trend is going towards a more natural, more spontaneous wood. Obviously, we also have to fight against climate change. As we have heard many times today, the sea water level is increasing, and humidity damages the pine trees. Because, well, you know, in most of the cases, the water is salty, obviously, and trees are suffering. And, well, obviously, we want to preserve the trees. So in those cases where, well, we have to act, we need to keep some fresh water. To find the right balance between fresh water and seawater. And also, obviously, we have to, well, to act whenever there's a strong wind damaging the trees. And also another enemy of our pine trees and pine woods are, well, is the snow. Heavy snow, again, damages or breaks foliage and the branches of our pine trees. Just an example of what we're doing is we are trying to install some micro plants in order to remove water from some areas that would otherwise be flooded. So about the future, so we are trying to install some pumps. What we're trying to do is we're trying to counter climate change or the consequences of climate change. And at the same time, we are trying to make sure that the forest looks like an ancient, spontaneous forest. Obviously, this is a wood that has undergone many changes due to political decisions in the the past, but it is a wood that has to look like a forest. It will never be a primary forest, but at least we would like it to look like an ancient wood. So it will have to be as natural as possible. We want it to have a nice vertical and also horizontal structure, and also the age. Obviously, nobody is going to remove any more trees from these pine woods, and we want to be able to govern the wood in a wise way. So these are photos that I took a few days ago inside the San Vitale pine wood. And as you can see, well, some dead trees are left standing if they're not dangerous, and also some trees down lying on the ground if they're not dangerous, because we wanted to have the look of an ancient forest. Well, you know, our local population is in love with the pine wood, not just the classical open pine wood, but actually we love no, it's not just us, it's also many animals and many other trees who love the pine wood. So what we have to do is we need to keep some areas of artificial pine wood where we mainly have pine trees. We need to have grass um, alternating with open spaces. And then we will also have a mesophilic wood, hygrophilous wood, and of course, our forest management plan is the tool that will define, well, actually, we're starting now planning our activities for the next few years. Well, it shouldn't be a 20-year plan. It should be a 100-year plan, but well, you know, it is a 20-year plan for the future. But anyhow, these are the objectives that we would like to reach. As I said, open areas are also a natural condition. We need to have open areas. In natural conditions, we would have big animals, big mammals, which are now extinct, unfortunately. And we would love to have these animals still. But anyhow, well, I think we can do something in order to maintain open areas. We are spending some hundreds of thousands, thousand euros. And so I think we should have a much more natural management of the wood. Then we would also have to keep these open areas and we should well use Romagna cows in order to do the maintenance of these open areas. This is all from me. Thank you. All right, thank you. Now, before starting with our conclusions, and well, I will draw up the conclusion. And also Patrizia, reply for your answer. Well, we are at the end of this conference now. So now I'd like to make a few closing remarks. And I've been taking a few notes, but I apologize, I will have to read them because I'm starting to feel a bit tired. So we have learned that we need to plant trees.
We need to make our cities greener and greener, trying to follow some logic and implement the phytomass of our cities, because trees are our main allies. And trees are included in the urban plans in a cross-cutting way. And they are connected to different sides of the topic. For those who listened to all the speakers, well, there are several actions that push local administrations to plant new trees. The regional councillor talked about the project for 4.5 million trees to be planted in Emilia-Romagna, or the financing for metropolitan cities for those municipalities falling within the areas involved in an improvement of the quality of air, but there are also other actions connected to the generation, the creation of partnerships between the public and private sector, so that also the efforts of local companies are not only focused on, I don't know, buying some acres of forests in Costa Rica or um, in South America. So, but bring the trees in the city, trees that we need to breathe, that we need also to renew. This morning, lots of experts have said that we need to adapt the trees that we have in our cities and the type of trees to climate change, considering that the scientific research told us that there are some species which are better for the fight against the climate change, because maybe they can catch carbon dioxide and make the climate in cities better. Another thing that we hope is to have millions of new trees. Also in Milan, there's a project in this sense. So having millions of trees that we must be able to raise, to grow, to protect protect their growth and also their effect of becoming old, so that they are useful to our life as citizens. We also need to find a balance between what we do every day in our cities and a new naturalness of the environments in which we live. We need to increase biodiversity at every corner, have naturalness everywhere. We focused on trees and on pine woods that are somehow followed by development of the wildlife as well. There are animals that we even noticed outside our windows during the lockdown in spring, because they were not able, let's say, to enter the urban areas before, whereas the better quality of life and this improved situation attracted them. But we also said, and this should also be considered, because we don't want our conference to be considered reductive. Well, we said that planting trees is not the only solution. It must be a sort of excuse for having a different lifestyle. Planting trees is for sure one solution. It enhances the environment and the lives of our cities, but a topic that we have underlined several times, also when we talked about our plan for sustainable energy and climate. Well, we need to change our lifestyles, use public transport. Maybe that's not the right moment considering the pandemic, but we need to go farther and be more far-sighted, look at the future, be able to go beyond this difficult moment and find a synergy between all the actions that we know should be taken, and that sooner or later we must start putting into practice. This is something we owe to our generations, but also to the future generations. We talked about what will happen in 80 years' time. Maybe the trees that we are planting today will be mature at that time and not even old. So we don't know what will happen. So I would like to conclude this day by launching the message: let's plant trees, let's do whatever we need to do, but let's be well aware of the risks and of what should be lasting in the course of time. There are still lots of participants. I thank you all for taking part. And now I leave the floor to Patrizia Petrucci, the head delegate in charge of green areas for the town of Cervia. Well, today was a very full day, a very fruitful day at the same time, because there were lots of topics and problems that we dealt with. This is going to be food for thought for our future. Cervia has always been dealing with green spaces and green areas, so it was an honor for us to count on the participation of such eminent speakers. And I would like to thank them all for intervening, for taking the floor. So many people that followed us, so many experts, but also many students. And we hope that they are going to be the future designers, future architects, and landscape designers in particular. So again, being farsighted and not stop, not be blocked by difficulties, but trying to turn them into opportunities. And in this very difficult time that unluckily we are still going through, we wanted to organize this conference even if at a distance. And we hope that this experience will be replicated also by other distributions, and we will always be available to collaborate with them. The beauty of living in an urban forest will become the leading idea at the basis of all the political and administrative actions of this administration for the municipality, because today's conference is just the beginning, the starting point. And I would like to conclude announcing that the municipality of Cervia will take part in Vivi Verdi 2020, about the opportunities and transformations of the, and it is promoted by the region of Emilia-Romagna. And a video was created about the various projects that were carried out in July and August this year. Earlier, it wasn't possible due to the lockdown. And also after the 4th of May, when the pine woods could be, let's say, visited again. Once again, I would like to thank all the participants, all the organizers, and in particular, Mr. Roberto Diolaiti, President of Public Gardens, who could able to moderate this conference. Thank you once again and enjoy the video. Goodbye.